Sheshariti, thank you very much for. I forgot completely about recording this session. Okay. So far we've lost it. Somebody else has to bring people up to speed. There was a person who went to the psychiatrist and he has a disease. He says, "Doctor, I am seeing worms all over me. I can't do any work. I've ruined all my relationships, my job, everything." Doctor says, "No, I don't see anything. It's clearly a mental thing because you can't see it." He says, "No, I can see it. I can see them crawling." Then the doctor asks, "Do you feel it?" He says, "Yeah, I feel it. I feel that they're there. But do you know it's not real?" Right? Because 10 people are saying it's not real and only you are saying it's your imagination. The patient says, "I know I'm a very intelligent person. I also have a degree. I used to be in a very top position. I also know all these things, but I can't help it. I feel that they're on me." And he keeps doing like this. And the doctor says, the psychiatrist says, "Don't do it so hardly. Do that side. It'll jump on me now." Okay. So what happens typically is whoever you interact with, it's only they're putting their garbage in you, you're putting your garbage in them. Okay. So all the neighbors, right? They talk to each other. मेरे घर में मेरे सास ये कर रही है, ये बोल रही है. Then the other lady said, "Nothing compared to my sauce." So it's a competition. Whose sauce is the worst? So you're talking to somebody who's in competition with you of who's suffering more. Okay, anything. You talk to people, you say, I'm working here. You say, "No, I'm working there." Then you say, "My boss is so horrible." My boss is even worse. To tell that somehow I am better than you, be it in my blessings or in my curses, I am better than you. The Sadguru or the Upanishad or the teacher of the Upanishad is not in that game. He or she is not getting affected by you, nor is affecting you in any way. He or she is removing all the misconceptions. That's why it's called Guru. Now, what the word Guru means? Guru means the one who destroys. He doesn't do any constructive work. He's not adding anything. No more programming. He's destroying the existing programs because he or she has become free from all programs. If he or she is not become free from programs, then that person is not a Sadguru. So Upanishad is talking about a Sadguru, meaning it is given by the enlightened master, one who has become free from programmings, and one who is able to see where you're stuck, which programming is, blocking you, and helps you to remove that. And you perceive. It's like something is in the eye, cataract, and the doctor removes it, you're able to see properly. That's all there is. Okay? That is the Upanishad. Upanishad is telling you about you. The subject matter of Upanishad I told is you. And it says you, Tat Tvamsi, you are Tat. You are God. You are Brahman. So Upanishad has some motive to tell I am God. Usually you don't get praised if people want something from you, right? If somebody wants something from you, they'll tell, "Oh my God, you were there when I needed help, because now also you need help." You were there that time, you saved me. You're such a great person. I heard that you helped this person. They subtly try to manipulate you with kind words and then extract from you. So Upanishad is telling you are Brahman, something it must try to extract. So Upanishad is not telling you to boost your ego or make you feel good. It is stating a fact. Okay, what is a fact? A fact can be verified. Like if you verify something, you verify something, you verify something, everybody verifies it's a fact. If something I can't verify, it's not in the realm of verification, then it's not factual. It's only that person's experience. What the Upanishad is saying is factual. When it says Tat Tvamasi, you are that, and you can verify it. It also gives the process of verifying it. And for thousands of years, people have verified it and have attained self-realization. That's why even after so many thousands of years of Upanishad being said, the Bhagavad Gita was spoken about 5,000 years ago. Even today, we contemplate on it. Why? Because it's talking about a fact which can be verified. It's not subject to time period. It's not subject to this region of people or this country, this planet also. Okay? Even if an alien goes through that same process of inquiry, it just needs a logical mind. Inquiry, arrive at the same realization, not an understanding. Okay? Realization that I am Brahman. What is realization? Realization is like how you experience yourself now as I am this person with a conviction, or I am this person. With the same conviction and clarity, you will experience I am Brahman. Okay? Because the misconception is removed. That is what is Upanishad. And the Rishi of the Upanishad is not known, of the Mandukya Upanishad. So they are associated with a Rishi called Manduka Rishi. That's why it's called Mandukya Upanishad. Manduka means, in Sanskrit, Manduka means frog. And the frog has two specialities. One is it croaks. Croak, croak, croak. It makes sound. So it's saying that the Rishi, Upanishad Rishi, the Rishi of the Mandukya Upanishad, is croaking the truth. This is the truth. You are this. At whatever time you hear, the sound will not change. At whatever time period, 5,000 years ago, 2021, 2030, 3021, at any point in time, it doesn't change. The teaching doesn't change. Because the teaching is about the fundamental I, you. And the teaching is, you are that. And also, the frog leaps. Every other insect or animal walks. Right? It crawls or walks. The frog jumps. So Mandukya Upanishad in 12 jumps to Brahman. That's the greatness of the Mandukya Upanishad. So don't underestimate the significance or auspiciousness of the Mandukya Upanishad. First of all, to get to listen to an Upanishad itself is very auspicious. To come to a point to realize I am Brahman is a very, very, very rare opportunity. Okay? We might have YouTube, we might have so many content creators, we might have thousands of books, but to get to listen to it in a simple way that you can understand is auspicious. It's not ordinary. And that too, of all the Upanishads, Mandukya Upanishad, which is the most significant Upanishad. Even Sri Shankaracharya, so there were three Acharyas. Acharya is basically, of course, a realized master who's teaching. But the Acharya is somebody who puts the realization, who communicates the realization in a systematic way. That person is called Acharya. So there were three main Acharyas that we recognize in Bharata, in India. One is Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and Shankaracharya. And for all the people who are here and people who are from this part of the world, Karnataka is a very special place because all these three Acharyas had centers in Karnataka. Nowhere else in India did all these three Acharyas meet. And what did these three Acharya teach? Madhvacharya taught about duality. It's called Dvaita. Ramanujacharya spoke about... Oh, just a moment. It's running. Okay, so Ramanujacharya spoke about Vishishta Advaita, more glorified or a special duality, and Shankaracharya thought about Advaita, non-duality, which is the approach in the Upanishad right now. So to tell you in a simple way, again with the story of Hanuman and Rama, in the Adhyatma Ramayana, somebody asked Hanuman, what is Rama to you? Hanuman says, when I think I'm Hanuman, when my eyes are open and I'm identified with me as Hanuman, then Rama is my master. There is Rama, there is me, and I am a servant of Rama. And whatever I do it as an offering to Rama. Okay, whatever I do it as an offering to Rama. I am devoted to Rama. So there is a devotee and there's a Bhagwan. That is called Dvaita. When it is a Dvaita, Dvaita means duality. When is Dvaita the reality? When you think you are a body. If you become the body, God also becomes a body. Okay, that is duality. But that's not reality. That's a starting point. So what is the approach in reality? It is devotion. So Madhvacharya, the approach of Madhvacharya was bhakti, devotion. Because I am there, I don't have the clarity that I am Brahman. I feel I am me, I am individual, and there is a higher intelligence which is beyond me. So I appreciate that. I am devoted to that. The path is bhakti. When you don't have gnana. Understand? So next is, then he says, Hanuman says, but when I meditate, when I do upasana, Rama dhyana, when I close my eyes and I feel Rama is in me, I feel more closer to Rama because I feel now Rama is in me. Now Rama is no longer a person outside of me, he's in me. And he's more useful in me. Then he can give me intuitive knowledge. My mind starts taking the form of Rama. I start thinking, okay, how would Rama respond to this situation? And I become more purified. I do more intelligent actions, more as how the person that I adore does. So whatever you adore, you become. That's the principle. You constantly think about a certain personality, you start behaving like that personality unconsciously or consciously. It start affecting your decision making. So people who work under certain great high achievers, they also start thinking like that. Okay, so usually Nobel laureates, no, for the PhD doctorate, they don't take a lot of people. They hardly take 5 or 6 people, and in the 5-6 people, at least 2-3 people will win a Nobel Prize because they start thinking like somebody who's already won the Nobel Prize. So you start working under somebody who's already wealthy, you start creating that because you start thinking like them. You start taking the decisions that they have taken. So Hanuman becomes more like Rama in Vishishtadvaita. When Rama is no longer, he's dual, but he's closer also. That is called Vishishtadvaita. Okay, that was taught by Ramanujacharya. Then Shankaracharya, Hanuman said, he didn't say about Shankaracharya, Hanuman said, the third is when my mind becomes deeply silent, shut down, then there is no me. Rama alone exists. Okay, and Rama doesn't exist as a body Rama. Whatever is only Rama. If I get a thought is Rama. If I see something, that is Rama. If I don't see something, that is Rama. If I look at my body, that is Rama. Everything is Rama. And Rama is no longer a body. Don't think I see the picture of Rama in the wall. No. The wall is Rama. The clarity has come. Okay. Example, let's say the whole of this thing was made of gold. Vivek. So happy. Everything is made of gold. Everything is made of gold here. All the books and chair and everything is made of gold. Although you see the objects, but you know that it's made of gold. It's gold. Okay. So whenever the Hanuman perceives with this realization, although he sees the object, he sees only Rama. He knows the underlying reality, which is consciousness, Rama. And there is non-duality. In non-duality, there is no you. Who is that you? Rama, consciousness. Who is the other? Rama. What is seen? Object, sky, Rama. Everything is consciousness, Bhagavan, including you. There is nothing that exists apart from consciousness. You understand? That is non-duality, and that was what was beautifully taught by, most clearly taught by Shankaracharya. So Shankaracharya had a guru called Govindapadacharya, and his guru was Gaudapadacharya. Now Gaudapadacharya, why I'm telling these names is it has a relevance to Mandukya Upanishad. So Gaudapadacharya wrote a book on Mandukya Upanishad. Mandukya Upanishad is only 12 shlokas, but Gaudapadhyaya wrote 200 odd shlokas, a book called Mandukya Karika, which is analyzing the 12 shlokas. Okay, and because of that, a lot of people were able to realize the truth. That's why it's significant. And that was given by Gaudapadhyaya. And from his lineage came Shankaracharya. So Nobel laureates, disciples, Nobel laureate. Think of it that way. Great thinkers in that stream. And we are continuing the same stream. The thought process of the Upanishad is the same, non-dual. This is not about there is separation from the existence. No. There is a special relation. No. There is nothing apart from consciousness. To have a relation, there should be two. Non-duality means no two. And it doesn't say one. It doesn't say Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Ekatva. No. Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Advaita. Advaita means no two. Is there one? The consciousness can't be called one. Okay? It's like calling space one. Space, you can't cut space. You can't say space inside my... where is space? Space is everywhere. And everything is in space. Now consciousness is beyond space. You can't name it as one. It is told us not to. That's why it's called Advaita. So the approach of Mandukya Upanishad is Advaita Vedanta. So I'll just take a pause at this time. So far, is it clear? Any doubts, questions? This was the premise of Mandukya Upanishad. You mean you want it warmer or colder? Warmer, okay. It's cold. Are we getting shaking because of Mandukya Upanishad? Oh my God, what is all this? Non-duality. So far, I was so happy with duality. Space is very cold. Space is very cold. Okay. So, Upanishad is the highest. It's not a philosophy. It is not a knowledge. It is ending of all your knowledge. It is a communication. It is a teaching not given to increase your knowledge. It is a teaching that puts an end to the knowledge, especially self-knowledge. It corrects self-knowledge. The Upanishads come as a part of the Vedas. So what we all have heard of the text called Vedas. Everybody has heard of Vedas. So Vedas are these most sacred texts. We don't know how old they are. It's been their time immemorial. It is not authored by any individual person. It is what is called as, it is heard and documented. And Sri Vedavyasa Maharshi codified the Yoga Vedas. He didn't write the Vedas. Vedavyasa Maharshi segregated them into 4 Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, Atharvana Veda. And what is the subject matter of the Vedas? Subject matter of the Upanishad is you. What is the subject matter of the Vedas? The Vedas deal with existence, and they understand that human beings have needs. Okay? And to get something, you need some action. Okay, you have a desire. I have a desire, let's say I have to build a house. It needs some preparatory elements. You need money, you need land, you need somebody to work. Now, Vedas are about how to get all these. So Vedas have something called as Karma Kanda, which has a prescription. If you do this process, you will get this result. So you want rain, do this puja, homa. If you want money, do this thing. If you want child, do this thing. So the Karma Kanda, so the Vedas have 3 parts: Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, and Gnana Kanda. Karma Kanda is about action. I want something, I do something, I get it. Action, result. Upasana is, now somebody has matured. He's figured out, no matter what I get, I can't be happy. Okay, I wanted happiness and I wanted to marry a girl. So I did the Vedas prescribed, okay, do this Homa, you'll get a girl. So I did the Homa and I got a girl called Kushi. Okay, I married the girl called Kushi. After that, I understood what is depression. Okay, some girl wanted to marry a guy. She got a guy called Santosh. So that she thought she'll be happy for the rest of her, happily ever after, like a princess. After that, she understood what is asantosh. Okay, dukkha. So at any point after getting anything, you immediately, or not, if not immediately, in some time realize, oh, this is not giving me what I actually wanted. I thought this will make me happy. It did make me happy only until I saw the other person's plate. Okay, I was very happy getting married until I saw the neighbor's wife. Right? So the mind is never satisfied with whatever it gets. And then the prescription is upasana. So you did karma kanda for your happiness, and you realized nothing you do can get happiness. You thought some partner will give you happiness, it didn't work out. You thought money will give you happiness. Money will actually gives more suffering than lack of money. At least when you didn't have money, somebody who doesn't have money has a hope. Oh, when I get money, I'll be happy. There is a hope that I'll be happy after I get money. For the person who has money and who realizes that there is no happiness, there's no hope. What more to get now? Now, what should I get to be? So the person with money is more depressed than the person without money. You understand? Because the person with money has got a deep understanding that money doesn't bring happiness. At least the person without money has hope. Ek din jab paisa aayega, khush rahenge. Okay, so nothing worked out. Happiness is sort of elusive. You can't catch it. Then the Vedas said, okay, upasana. Think about higher principle. There are higher principles that operate the universe. Upasana is about connecting to them. Then you become more expanded. Then the last part of Vedas is called Vedanta, Gnana Kanda. End of Vedas. And the end of Vedas is called Upanishad. So Upanishads are the end point of Veda. It's called Vedanta. Anta means end. So no longer running around. This is the dead end. Dead end of your journey, Upanishad. Is there, so after I learn Upanishad and understand Upanishad, is there anything more? No. This is the dead end. But Vedas is infinite. There's no dead end there in Karma Kanda and Upasana. So the story is, there was a rishi called Bharadwaja Rishi. Bharadwaja Rishi was doing tapasya. This is in Satya Yuga. We're in Kali Yuga right now. In Satya Yuga, he was doing tapasya. In Satya Yuga, tapasya goes on for thousands of years. He does, and he does a lot of tapasya for many years. And Brahmaji appears. Brahmaji, beta, I'm very happy with your tapasya. What do you want? Bharadwaja Rishi says, I need 100 more years. And Brahmaji thinks, okay, it's a silly question. Okay, maybe people want to be more happy. Take 100 more years. Then again, he spends the entire 100 years doing tapasya for Brahmaji. Again, Brahmaji appears. He says, Brahmaji asks, what do you want, beta? Bharadwaja Rishi says, I want 100 more years. Now Brahmaji asks a question, why do you want 100 more years? He says, I want to understand the Vedas. I want to complete the study of Vedas. Okay, complete the study of Vedas. Karma Kanda. Brahmaji says, they're sitting obviously outside in the mountains. Brahmaji takes out a handful of mud from the land. He says, in 200 years, you have only learned this much of the Vedas. And the Vedas is the mountain behind you, Himalaya. Even if I give you 10,000 years, you will not be able to finish. So there is no end to knowledge. To what knowledge? To worldly objective knowledge. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. The more you expand, the more you go deeper, the more it expands. The subject expands. Be it any subject. Medicine, music, dance, engineering, anything. The more deeper you go, the deeper it unfolds. So existence is infinite. If you want to see more, it will show you more. So how far do I need to go? You need to As long as you can walk it, you can keep going. You take the next step, the path appears. So there's no end. Is there an end to my journey? Is there an end to this whole journey of seeking happiness and cycle of birth and death? There is an end. And that end is called Vedanta. And that Vedanta is Upanishad. Vedanta is primarily three. What is called as Prasthanatraya. Prasthanatraya means cannon. You know what is a cannon? Like it's a weapon of destruction. You put a cannonball and fire. So the three cannons considered in this in Indian spirituality. One is Brahma Sutra, one is Upanishad, and Bhagavad Gita. These three are called Vedanta. They'll end your journey. When I say journey of cycle of birth and death. They bring you self-realization. Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, Upanishad. And Upanishads have 10 major Upanishads. Out of that, Mandukya Upanishad is one. Otherwise, there are a lot of Upanishads, 108 Upanishads and more. So far clear? This is the background of Upanishad. What is Upanishad? What is Vedanta? Why Upanishad is important. Now we'll dive into what is Mandukya Upanishad. Any questions so far? Anybody online? So Mandukya, clear so far of what is Upanishad? What is Mandukya Upanishad? Okay, Mandukya Upanishad was a favorite Upanishad of Acharya Shankaracharya. Okay, because it is so straightforward, so simple and direct, without extending your spiritual journey. The Guru or the enlightened master wants to end the spiritual journey. The Sadguru never starts the spiritual journey. People usually think after I meet the Guru, my journey will start then. Like how if I meet a dance teacher or some master in some subject, your journey begins from there, right? It begins from this point that you met the master. In spirituality, the moment you meet your Sadguru, your journey ends. Okay, it's not. There's no more dragging, prolonging, and Mandukya Upanishad ends it as quickly as only 12 shlokas. Even Bhagavad Gita is 700 shlokas. Mandukya is only 12 simple direct shlokas. So what these shlokas are, and one by one, hopefully in the sessions we will contemplate. Today we'll start with, before we actually go to the shloka, we'll chant first the Shanti mantra. So each Upanishad starts with a Shanti mantra and then the shloka of the Upanishad. So I'll chant the Shanti mantra. You can repeat after me. Om Bhadram Karnebihi Shrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyema Akshabiryajatraha Sthirairangai Tushtuvagum Swastanobihi Yashema Devahitam Yatayuhu Swastina Indro Drashravaha Swastina Pusha Vishwavedaha Swastinastraksho Arishtanemihi Swastino Spatir Dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
So the Shanti mantra. Why is it called Shanti mantra? What is Shanti?
He is in the call.
Huh? Shanti is in the call. So Shanti ji, what is Shanti? There's a person called Shanti Bhushan here. Shanti ji, what is Shanti mantra?
nothingness, nothing.
Huh?
It's the void, peace.
Peace. Does your wife chant Shanti mantra? Every day she chants Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti. The Shanti mantra is bringing the perspective of what is that we're trying to achieve. Is Shanti. Okay? You say, okay, I want something. I want self-realization. I want God. I want Bhagwan. Why? Whatever you want. So there was a person sitting at the beach and relaxing, a young person sitting in his 30s, sitting at the beach and relaxing and enjoying watching people and the waves and just relaxing. There is a senior elderly person that comes to him, a businessman. He's not comfortable looking at this person peacefully sitting. So he says, "What are you doing here, man? Don't you have some work to do?" He says, "No, I have no job in the world. My only job is to relax." Then the old man asks, "Oh, what will you do then? What will you do if you don't have a job? What will you do for money?" He says, "So what should I do? You tell me." He says, "You should go get a job first." Then the young man asks, "Okay, what happens if I get a job? If you get a job, people will respect you that you have a job. They won't call you jobless person." And he says, "Okay, fine. What else? What if I don't care what people think?" Then you'll get money. You don't have to worry. You'll get money. What if I have money? If you have money, you can marry someone. What if I marry someone? Then you can have children. Okay, what if I have children? Then they'll grow up. Okay, what if they grow up? Then you can take pleasure in their life. You can see them growing up to be great people. You can give them education. It's okay, what if I do that? Then they'll grow up. Then they'll get some job. What if they get a job? Then you can get them married. What if they get married? Then you'll have grandchildren. What if I have grandchildren? Then you'll be happy. You can be happy playing with your grandchildren, sitting at the beach. The young man says, "That's what I'm doing right now." You're putting all these conditions for happiness. Okay? Do this, then you'll be happy. Then do this. So somehow you're postponing happiness. Okay? So you say, do something, get a job. Why? To be happy. Then you realize you don't get happy if you get a job. Then you were like, "Oh, I was better off when I was studying only. No responsibilities. Aram said somebody else, my father and mother was taking care of my Anapina. I was happily enjoying. Then now I am responsible, right?" So then you say, "No, I got the job. If I maybe buy some clothes, I'll be happy. Buy a big car, I'll be happy." So then you buy the car, then again you lose the happiness. So somehow, whatever you do, you're doing for happiness, you're always doing with an interaction with something external, thinking that something, the happiness in the object. Okay? If the happiness was in the object, it should give the same result to everybody. If the happiness was in the phone, if I have the phone or if I give the phone to somebody else, they should also be happy. If the happiness was in coffee, if I drink the coffee, the person next to me drinks the coffee, it should be the same thing. But if I drink the coffee, the person next to me is diabetic, we can't maybe have coffee with sugar, it is poison for that person. Okay? Yeah, then I see this Romeo and Juliet, right? A lot of people thought Juliet was very ugly. They didn't understand, what does Romeo see in Juliet? If she was beautiful, everybody should be able to see it. Clearly, what he's deriving out of her is not there in her. What you're deriving as happiness out of an object is not there in the object. Where's the happiness coming from? If it was there in the object, if you touch the object, somebody else touched the object, everybody should get the same result. But do they? Somebody goes to some movie, half people give 3 stars, some people give 1 star, some people give 5 stars. Right? A review, ratings. You order on Zomato, you see the rating. You order food online, you see the ratings. Somebody's given 1-star rating, it was horrible. This was very good. So clearly, the horrible or the very good is not there in the object. Where is it coming from? Where is the happiness coming from? It's coming from where? Coming from where? From you. So you say, you put a condition that I will be happy when I buy this, when I get this object. Okay, it's a condition. You put a condition. It's a self-imposed condition. You can live without the condition also, like the man at the beach. But you say, I will be happy when I get the object. The object has become a means to the end that is already there inside you. So instead of eating like this, you're eating like this. Okay, so then you get the object. What happens to you? You become happy. Right? Why did you become happy? No, you wanted to buy a car. You just bought a car. You became happy?
Yeah.
You became very happy. So what happened when you got the car?
Gratification.
Gratification. How long did it last?
7
7 days. 7 days. Very good. So when you get the object, momentarily the mind becomes peaceful. Because you suddenly got the object, the mind has no desire now. Shut down. And when the mind shut down, happiness, which is your own nature, was revealed in the mind. It didn't come from outside. Where did it come from? It came from you. You are the source of happiness, but you put a condition to it. You are the source of peace, and you put a condition to it. So Shanti is unconditional peace. There's a difference between Shanti and peace. So please understand, all Sanskrit words, especially the words that are used in the Upanishads or the teaching, they cannot be translated into any other language. Shanti doesn't mean peace. When I say peace, your peace is absence of any. If nobody's there in the house, I'm peaceful. Yeah, somebody else. Oh my God! All the parents will be so peaceful when the children start going to school. 1 year they were at home, right? They become peaceful. That is not Shanti. Shanti is unconditional peace. It is Param Shanti. It is your true nature. It is not. There can be disturbance out. It's not talking about Shanti as in everything is quiet and there's some recording going. Oh, nothing like that. It has nothing to do with the external. Internally, the mind is tranquil. Think of it like deep sleep state. Deep sleep, but you're awake. That is Shanti. You're not, and that Shanti is unconditioned and undisturbed. It cannot be shaken by any changes outside. Presence of or absence of object doesn't disturb Shanti, but it can disturb peace. Your peace can easily be disturbed. So Shanti that the Upanishad is talking about is not peace. It is talking about Param Shanti, which is your state. It is Sthiti. It is your true inner state, which is unconditioned, which is not dependent on anything, and which is undisturbed by any external changes. That is what you want. And instead of saying that, you tell something else. So whatever desires you have right now in life are actually for that, for Shanti. And the Shanti is called Narayana. The Shanti is called, that's why it's in the Vishnu Sahasranama. In the Vishnu Sahasranama it said, Shantakaram, repeat after me, Shantakaram, Bhujagashayanam, Padmanabham, Suresham. The form of the Lord is Shanti, not peace. It's unconditioned, undisturbed, in a state of peace. And that peace only is Bhagavan. So somebody says, I want to see Bhagavan. Why? If Bhagavan comes in front of you and gives you bad news, then you don't want that. You want Bhagavan for some happiness. Why do you want happiness? Because you're disturbed. And you think happiness will solve the problem. And clearly happiness is not solved because you've got happiness. Not like you've not seen happiness. There's nobody in the world who's not seen happiness or not experienced happiness. But that has not made your mind tranquil. On the contrary, it has added more disturbance. Okay? Now you are sad thinking about the happiness that you had. Oh my God, I was so happy when I was unmarried. Oh my God, I was so happy when I was young. I had a young body. Now my body parts are falling apart. I was so happy when I was in Paris. I came to Bangalore, so much traffic. I was so happy when I was in India. Now I've come to Dublin. Right? Now that happiness which you experienced is becoming suffering to you now. Right? The happiness that you have now also will do the same thing for you tomorrow. And you know that. You understand? So you want happiness, but what you actually want is Param Shanti. Somewhere you're not getting it. Because you don't understand it. You're only thinking in terms of objects. Life is inner experience. Life has nothing to do with external objects. Please understand. The moment you shift the focus from outer to your inner experience, you will be more natural, more spontaneous, like a child. The child's mind is not superficial. It doesn't go by superficial. Or you put a branded shoe and give to the child versus some 200 something that you bought off the street. The child probably like the one. It goes by a natural, spontaneous experience. The child doesn't distinguish between this person is beautiful or ugly. But your mind will only, okay, I will talk to this person. They look good. You go, are they wearing a watch? It's so expensive. Maybe they are very rich. You go by some parameters and you filter out. Understand? And there's nothing wrong. Ultimately, you only want Param Shanti. Infinite peace. And that's why it's not Shanti mantra. It is telling you, it's setting the context that we are here to discuss our peace. Our focus is Param Shanti, nothing else. We're not here to argue about my God is better than your God, my system is better than your system. There's no argument. We both agree that peace is important in life. And unconditional, infinite peace and happiness. Happiness, peace and happiness, unconditionally. It should not be conditioned, it should be infinite. It should not be like, it should not be a random accident in my life. It should be a constant background in my life. And I should live out of that background. Right now, what is the constant background in life? What is the constant inner background?
Take care of people.
Those are thoughts. Where are they coming from? What is the background?
That's from me.
It's from you. There's a disturbance. The mind is disturbed. Okay. The noise is the background right now. From noise, you're picking some noise. You're paying attention to one noise. You understand? There's a lot of noise in the mind. You pay attention to one noise and move ahead. Self-realization is about becoming noise-free. So it's called nirvana. Buddha attained nirvana. You heard the word called nirvana? Vani means sound. Nirvana means no sound. No sound means because I don't become deaf. No sound means no inner sound. Shanti, Param Shanti. And in that no inner sound, whatever is required for my life appears as a thought, a sound. And I respond to that. Otherwise, there's a constant inner sound that there is sound. There's a constant noise that there is noise, that I'm not yet fulfilled. Mukti or self-realization fulfills you. There's the only thing that will fulfill you. That's why it's called mukti. Mukti means freedom. Freedom from this noise that you have inside you that I'm not fulfilled. Whatever I get, I'm not fulfilled. I try to get something, I didn't become fulfilled. Then I try to impose around my child. I will become fulfilled from my child's achievements. That also will not happen. then death will come. Then you'll realize my whole life is gone without fulfillment. Then you start another birth. That's why I said, Shankaracharya said, Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janani, Jarare Shayana. It goes on and on until you get fulfilled. Okay? It's an endless cycle. And when will it get fulfilled? When will you attain completeness? When you will become fulfilled? You understand fulfilled? Meaning, fulfilled meaning no more noise inside me. There's no thought that I have to become fulfilled. That itself is fulfillment. Not that you got something. There's no inner noise. That is fulfillment. When will you reach that point? By getting something? Huh? When will you stop seeking? You will stop seeking only when you get the final. When you get something that there's nothing more to get after that. That is your own self. What you're looking for is you. The real you, not duplicate you. Okay? And that is what you're seeking, and that is Param Shanti, which is in you. So the Shanti mantra is all our focus is on Param Shanti. We understand that because, and this is only for people who understand. Okay, somebody who comes to the point, and Upanishads all declare that this is only for people who have been cooked enough in life, who have seen ups and downs in life, who have attained and lost both, who have become successful and failed, who have seen the trivial nature of objects, relationships, glory, life and death, who have understood that there is nothing, this is madness, I'm living in a mad world. Somebody who's come to the point where they say, whatever I get, something is not working out for me. Then you're ready for spirituality. But if you say, no, I think I can get it, then please go ahead. For that, they'll tell, okay, karma kanda. You want to get it right? Take this as a prescription. If somebody says, I can do it, I'm gonna find this on my own, I'm gonna do it, please wait, karma kanda. Then after they do everything, break down, again, they come back to the point that it's not working out. So this is for the people who have understood the nature of life, the nature of existence, especially for people who are married, who have understood what suffering means in life. Just kidding. Basically, for people who have understood the nature of life and objects and how everything is, the happiness keeps escaping me, and I'm genuinely seeking a solution. I see through this nature. I see through the nature of life. I see through nothing makes sense. I see through whatever I have, I'm going to lose it. So if I'm dwelling in the glory of my physical appearance and my age, I know that I'll lose it in a few years. So I can't hold on to it. I see through that I'm not able to hold on to anything. As long as you have something to hold on to in the objective world, you will not come to asking, questioning. So this is for the people who have burnt their hands holding on to all sorts of things. Somebody held on to money, they burnt their hand. Somebody held on to relationship, burnt their hand. Somebody held on to God, burnt their hand. Okay? Now your hands are burnt. Your mind is lost. Now you're seeking somebody who has it. Okay? Who's found it. And that person is supposed to be the Sadguru. And the Upanishad is about sitting near such a master, asking them, how did you get there? And the master explained, this is where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you're there. Okay? That is, and Shanti Mantra. Shanti Mantra, in this Shanti Mantra, this is a Shanti Mantra that is shared by many Upanishads. Bhadram Karne Vishnu Deva. I won't go into detail. To be honest, each word of the Upanishad or the Bhagavad Gita or Brahma Sutra or any of the scripture, one lifetime is not enough to dive into them. Especially even the Mandukya Upanishad, there are 12 shlokas. But the more you get acquainted with them, the more you understand them, the more they go deeper and blow your mind. And even this Shanti mantra, even the word, one word, we can spend one session. But none of us have that much time. And we don't know in Corona situation if we'll be alive tomorrow. So might as well learn as much as possible right now. So I won't get into the details of the Shanti mantra. I'll get into the details of the shlokas. The Shanti Bhadram Karne Vishwanayamadeva Bhadram Pashyema Akshabir Yadatraha is basically talking about, the prayer is, let me Bhadram Karne Vishwanayamadeva, let my ears hear the auspicious. I've spent my entire life listening to nonsense. What is the nonsense you've heard entire life?
Make money, make kids, make them study,
Even preceding that,
get married,
was something that is before that.
or study, become this, become that.
It is that you are a girl,
Yeah.
that you are a body, that you are this name, you are this person. I have been constantly listening to the world treating me as a body. Okay? That's why I also believe that. Nobody has told me till date that I am consciousness, I am Paramatma. Okay? Everybody is telling I am a body. I am a good body, I am a beautiful body. Oh, I am so beautiful. Everybody is talking about my body, but nobody is talking about me. So let me hear the auspicious, and the most auspicious is about the real you, not the false you. Whatever you is heard about the false you is poison. It reinforces your false notion of I am the body. And only in satsang will you listen to the auspicious. That's why it's called satsang. Satsang means people usually think there'll be some Guruji sitting and they'll be doing bhajans and everybody is like, ah. That is not satsang. Satsang is sat, where the truth is heard. The truth that I am not the body is heard. That is satsang. Okay? So let me hear that auspicious. Let me see that. I'm only seeing objects. Let me see the consciousness behind the object. Bhadram Karne Vishwanayamadeva Bhadram Pashyema Akshabir Aksha Yadatraha Sthirai Rangai Tushtuvagum. Let my physical body be strong for 100 years. So the Upanishad, if somebody lives 30 years of life, they become suicidal. 20 years, especially in the mad world that we live right now, 20, 30 years is enough to make you depressed and suicidal, to leave the world. But the Upanishads talk about, let me live 100 years. Because the life that they are seeing is more beautiful compared to the life that you perceive. They're also perceiving the same world. They're also perceiving disease, death. But somehow they're asking for more long life. Because they perceive conscious Bhagwan in everything. So 100 years is not enough. And they're being realistic. Unrealistic, they can ask for thousands of years. But realistically, they are saying, average life, let me live for a long time with a fit physical body so that I may experience the truth and also share the truth. Okay? Sthirai range tushtuvagam swastanobi vishema devahitam yedavu swastina indro vritashravaha. So it prostrates to many divine beings, forces of nature. May they bless us. Meaning, may the forces of nature that control existence, may they keep our blessing on us so that we may live a happy, peaceful life by sharing this wisdom. That is the premise. Understand? That is a Shanti mantra. Now we will start contemplation on Mandukya Upanishad, but we have only 15 minutes. So we'll postpone it to the next session. But in the next 15 minutes, how many of you are okay to extend by another 10 minutes? After you just raise your hand. You're okay? Okay. People here okay? No, after that we'll do this. So we'll extend for 10 more minutes. I wanted to cover the practical application of the Mandukya Upanishad, which is Omkara Dhyana. So I'll just give a brief introduction of the first shloka, and then we'll jump into Omkara Dhyana, which is actually very, very important and significant. just that itself will suffice for mukti. It encompasses all spiritual teachings. What that is, I'll tell you. But first, let's just see what is the first shloka of the Mandukya Upanishad. Repeat after me. This is the first shloka of the 12 shlokas of the Mandukya Upanishad. Om iti etad aksharam idam sarvam tasyopya vyakhyanam bhutam bhavat bhavishyaditi sarvam omkara eva yachanyat trikalatītam tadapi omkara eva tadapi omkara eva. The entire Mandukya Upanishad is about Omkara. There's only one. So I told you the entire Upanishad is about you. And now I'm telling the entire Mandukya is about Omkara. What do you deduce? You, the real you, and Omkara is the same. To understand Omkara is to understand you. To understand you is to understand Omkara. When I say Omkara, don't think of it in terms of symbol. The symbol Om or the sound Om. Omkara is actually, it's called Nada Brahma. It is Brahman. How that is so? We'll look into that. So, for example, anything in the world is two things: name and form. So there's a form and there's a name to it. Mobile form, mobile name. Is the name the form? The name is a pointer to the form. The name can never be the form in the objective world. But in Omkara, in the case of Omkara, the name is the named. Omkara is the name of Parabrahman. Omkara is not pointing to Parabrahman. Omkara is Parabrahman. To understand Omkara, to realize Omkara, is to realize yourself as Brahman. How that is so is the contemplation. And when I say Omkara, don't mistake it with the sound Om. The sound is just the most exterior aspect of Om. Okay, for example, what is your name?
Simran.
When I say Simran, it's pointing to you. How much of the word Simran can describe you, can show you in any way? How much percentage? 0%. You are nothing. The name can never do justice to you. Right? So the word Om is the outermost. Our journey is diving into Om so that we experience the real Om. And the real Om is Sakshat Parabrahma. So it's called Nada Brahma. To tell you a story, the Guru Nanak. Everybody heard of Guru Nanak? Guru Nanak Maharaj? This is from the life of story of Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak Maharaj, one day it said that he and his disciple were passing through the river, traveling by the river, and Guru Nanak Ji entered into the river. For 3 days he was there and everybody was waiting outside. Where did he go? 3 days nobody can survive. Then he came out of the water, and the first thing that he said is Satanam Eka Omkar. The name of the truth, Satanam, the name, real name of Bhagavan, Eka Omkar. The meaning of the story is he went into deep samadhi, meaning a state of no mind. where you go beyond all thinking, feeling, emotion, like a deep sleep, how you go in deep sleep, but you go into a conscious way. There is a realization of what is reality. And when he comes out of it, and to say he came out of the river and he said, Satanamika Omkar, only Om is the name of Bhagavan. And there is no argument in any religion about this. Religions argue about God. My God has 4 hands, your God has 2 hands. My God has 3 heads, your God has 1 head. My God is a man, your God is a woman. They all fight, always fight. My God is better than your God, you have to follow my God. This is my book, this is your book. But none of them fight about Omkar. Sanatana Dharma, Buddhism, Jainism, which originated from Bharata, all 3 agree that Omkar is the most sacred. They place Omkara the highest. Nobody fights about Omkara. Everything below they fight. Omkara they don't fight about. In other religions like Islam, Christianity, Jew, they also have Om, but in a different format. So in Christianity it's called as Amen. Amen. It is the same Uma used as Amen. In Islam it's Ameen. And it is such a fundamental sound. Why it is a fundamental sound? Why is Om so significant? When if you read about the sound of the universe, there is the sound of the sun. NASA has put out a blog and a video where the scientist of that program talks about the sound of the sun. You listen to it, it is Om. In space, there is no sound. But with advanced machinery, if you listen to the sound is Om. Everything in the universe is Omkara. It's called primordial sound. Akara, Om has 3. Akara, Ukara, Makara. The 3 sounds, to say the 3 sounds, you don't have to use the tongue. The tongue doesn't move. The tongue doesn't move to say Uma. But to say any other word, any other sound, the tongue moves. Uma is the only sound that you can make without where the tongue doesn't have to move. It's a 3, and the tongue mixes the sounds to create all the other sounds. So to give you an example, the example is given on the television. You see billions of colors in the television. How many colors are there? You watch television?
Yeah,
How many colors are there in television?
so many.
Only 3.
RGB.
RGB. And the transmission, there's only RGB, red, blue, green. But the red, blue, green are mixed and you see a word. So when Bhagavan transmits, there's only and everything else is just a play. So basically your entire life only you've heard Om. Even if you use foul language on somebody, you've said Om. Whatever you've heard abuses about yourself, you've heard only Om. That is our name. I told there are 2 things, name and form. All names are Om. Okay? All names, all Nama is Paramatma Nama. That is Om, Pranava Nama. That is Om. That was clear? Mixing of the Uma. Now all forms are what? What is a form? Form is an object. If you go into the object, what is there in the object? Subatomic objects, subatomic particles. And when you go deeper into subatomic particles, what is there? There is the particle becomes a wave. There's particle and wave. It's called particle wave duality. So at the deepest level, the modern science can only go to that point. They have not gone beyond that. At the deepest level, you can only go to a particle and wave form. And both particle and wave are nothing but Om, vibration, energy. Existence is nothing but Omkar. Name and form both included. And the shloka of the what he just said is Om iti etad aksharam. Om iti etad aksharam. Akshara means, what is akshara? Akshara. Kshara means perishable. Akshara means imperishable. Om is the only imperishable. Everything perishes except Om. To tell in the modern language, you all use computer, right? So in computer you do many things. You can watch the video, you can watch some movie, you can listen to a song, you can write a program, you can create something else, you can create file folders, Word document, so many things. What does the computer understand? Computer only reads it as 1 and 0. Whatever you put in the machine, you can see the world inside it, three-dimensional world. For the computer, if let's say the computer had consciousness, what does the computer perceive? Only 1 and 0. Okay, this is what happened to. This is what is called happened to Guru Nanak Ji. When he came and said Satanam Yuk Omkar, he saw into the mind of existence. Everything is Om. Like how the computer only, you can have anything, you can, from your perspective, you have so many things. But from the computer's perspective, it's only 1 and 0, nothing else is there. Everything, no matter how distinct it is, you see a multiplicity, there's only 1 and 0. You see multiplicity, there's only Omkar. From the perspective of Bhagavan. And when I say Bhagavan, don't think some other creature, some being. It is you. You can experience that. Because if it's not possible for you, it's useless. It will always be somebody else's reality. You can experience the existence as Om. Not the sound Om, but the reality Om. Okay? Aksharam. Idam Sarvam. Idam Sarvam. It says it is all inclusive. Sarvam. Nothing is excluded. Planets, galaxies, multiverses, good, bad, no distinction, no separation, no exclusion. Everything is inclusive. Idam Sarvam Tasyopa Vyakhyam. And we'll contemplate on that, starting now. It is stating the final and then deriving. Like when you used to write your maths exam, right? For 2 marks, you just have to give the answer. For 10 marks, you have to derive how did you arrive at the answer. So the first shloka is telling this is the answer. Sarvam is Omkar. The next shloka is how. Waking, dreaming, sleeping, it explores. Then it says Bhutam. Bhuta is past. Bhuta means doesn't mean ghost. Bhuta means past. Whatever was there in the past. 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, before the creation. So science, modern science says creation happened because of the Big Bang. Right? There's a Big Bang and then creation came. And there'll be a destruction and there'll be another Big Bang. Science says the Big Bang didn't happen right, only this, now our existence. This is, we don't know how many Big Bang we're living in. So whatever was there in whatever Big Bang was only Omkar. Not that something else was there at some point of time. It became something else. It will Bhutam, Bhavan. Now also it's that. Bhavishyaditi. Even in the future, it will be only Omkara. That's why knowing Omkara, you know all Bhuta, Bhava, past, present and future. That's why Gnani, or an enlightened person, is called Trikala Gnani. Have you heard the word Trikala Gnani? Somebody who knows past, present and future. So people have a notion that, okay, they'll be able to see the future and tell us something. Trikala Gnani doesn't mean they know events of the future. They know everything as Omkara. They realize the essence of all time. And they know what is beyond time, which is Omkara. Omkara is time and beyond time. Sound and beyond sound. Omkara has 2 parts. Sound, which is Akara, Ukara, Makara. And silence, which happens after the Makara. So Omkara includes Sarvam. Sound, silence. Presence, absence. Life, death, past, present, future. And we thought Omkara is just a sticker on the wall. Bhuta, Bhavat, Bhavishyaditi, Sarvam Omkara eva. Everything is only Omkara. Yat Chanya Trikala Titam. Even the beyond time, Trikala Titam. Whatever is Atita, beyond time, even that is Omkara. Tadapi Omkara eva. That is what we'll contemplate on. So the Omkara is so significant in your life then you can think. So you should all be fortunate you're living in a country where you can get to hear all this stuff. Okay, so Om, we listen to Om. Without knowing, it does something. In our biology also. So when it said when the child is in the womb, the child, what does the child hear? What does the child hear? Mother's heartbeat. And when the child grows up, if you put headphones and play the heartbeat of the child will calm down again. It remembers its place, as in its original place. The child is very comfortable in the womb. The moment it comes out, it starts crying because it's a separation. Medically, it's called the first, what is it called? The cutting of the umbilical cord. You're separated from the mother. There's some term for that. It's called the primordial pain, or something on those lines. It's the first pain, not just physical pain. It is an existential pain that the child feels because it's getting separated. It's being removed from the mother, where it was happily in the womb. There's nothing the child has to do. It doesn't have to cry. It doesn't have to do anything. Everything is taken care of. But now it has to breathe. It has to do something. It has to cry to be taken care of. It feels a separation from the mother. That is the beginning of your duality. You were in non-duality in the womb. You didn't know I am there, mother is there. There is non-duality. The moment you came out of the womb, duality started. Oh, I am no longer with the mother. Then you have to cry for the mother. Mother, come. Okay? So that separation is a fundamental scar in your consciousness. Now, whole life is about filling that scar, healing that scar. You try to heal it with money, you try to heal it with another person's spouse, try to heal it with children, try to heal it with knowledge, nothing will get healed. Only non-duality can heal that scar. You understand? It's a separation from existence. And what will connect you back is Omkara, because Omkara is the heartbeat of the universe. And the existence is your real mother. The mother is only instrumental mother. If the existence doesn't take care of you, what can mother do? Who's taking care of you inside the womb? Mother is making the eyes grow and the ears grow and the head grow. If you're deformed, mother can't do anything. Physical mother can't do anything. The real mother is the existence. And the heartbeat of the real mother is Omkara. That's why when you listen to Om, your mind becomes calm. So on such a Om, we will contemplate. As we said, we are extending for some time and we'll now dive into the meditation. We didn't have much time to contemplate more on the first shloka. We'll take it up in the next session. We'll jump directly into the practice now. And we will see how what is the practical application of what we just learned. Okay. So shall we start the meditation? Can everybody please go on video? Before we go into meditation, I want to see the faces. Is it meditative face or not? Shanti ji, clear so far? Kundan ji?
Yes, it is clear. I'm not
Can't hear you.
Is it clear now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So it's clear. Yeah, absolutely.
Joga ji?
Yes, it is clear, sir.
Chakrapani?
Yeah, clear, sir. Clear.
Okay. And Beena, clear so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we will dive into the Omkara Dhyana. So before all the meditations came, so we have a lot of meditation practices in the market. In the spiritual market, there's a lot of meditation practices. You give $1,000, you get this meditation, level 1, level 2, level 3. Right? So people have made meditation into business, audio meditation and all that. The most secret, ancient meditation is Omkara Dhyana. It is always passed. We read in the books, Amar Chitra Katha and all the books, that the yogis are sitting and meditating. They're doing Omkara Dhyana. The Omkara Dhyana is the most uncorrupted meditation form and most ancient, which is passed on from master to disciple, It's passed on through the scriptures. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna on the battlefield, Omkara Dhyana. And Krishna tells, he also tells of Palashruti of Omkara Dhyana. Anybody who chants Om at the time of death, they will not have another birth. The Omkara Dhyana will move the mind into supreme consciousness. It's a connection between individual consciousness to universal consciousness. It bridges the gap. It's a bridge. So anybody who chants Omkara immediately experiences themselves as Brahman, and if they have not realized, if they have not become Jivan Mukta, if they have not become enlightened, if they just chant mentally or verbally at the time of death, they'll become liberated. But don't wait until the time of death, because we don't know how you will die. Don't know if you'll die in an accident or you'll die in the hospital with drugs. We don't know how you will die. So better you do it, better you get it when you're sound, sane, and fit. Okay, so we'll start the Omkar Dhyana. It's a very simple dhyana, very significant. The process is, I'll take you through each step, and each step purifies the consciousness, changes the biology, and also transforms the mind and uproots the vasanas, tendencies in programming. Okay, I'll take you through it. Close your eyes. You can sit in a relaxed position with if you're sitting on the chair or on some surface, keep your feet firmly on the ground, or sit in Sukhasana. Keep your hand either on each other or in Chinmudra, whatever works. Keep your back straight. Relax. Take 3 deep breaths, but as you breathe, the stomach should expand. So when you breathe in, the breath goes deep inside, fills up the stomach, deeper, not just lungs, deeper. Stomach expands, and breathe out, stomach goes in, and the breath goes out of the nose. So take a deep breath, breathe in deep, breathe out. Once again, breathe in deep, breathe out, relax. Relax your entire body, relax your face, relax your forehead, relax your shoulders, just relax. Let us start the auspicious, sacred Omkara Dhyana. Mentally bow down to either your Guru or deity or just the Supreme Intelligence, and seek for the grace to realize your true self. Let us start the Omkara Dhyana by chanting Akara. When you chant Akara, the vibration begins at the Nabi, at the stomach region. When you say the vibration naturally happens at the stomach region. The stomach region is the center of energy for your body. It is where your food gets digested, and the food also, the energy gets distributed throughout the body. It's a very significant center without which you cannot act. It is also the center through which you are connected to your biological mother. And you experienced a separation from your biological mother and started experiencing fear, duality, and stress. So the chanting of Akara heals the Manipura chakra, or the Nabi center, the stomach center, the energy center in the stomach, and connects you with your real mother, who is Jagannatha, universal mother, through Omkar. So again, you connect back to your true universal mother by chanting Akara. So you can chant after me. Experience the sensation, the vibration in the stomach region. Again, become aware of the vibrations in the stomach center, Nabi. Let us chant again. You can chant along. The entire body gets filled with energy, vibration, because of chanting of Akara in the center of energy, which is stomach center. Again. Now, let us chant Ukara. So it goes like oo, but the Ukara, if you observe, originates and vibrates in the heart center, in the center of your chest. The heart center is a center for your emotional experiences. You go through various emotions, joy and sorrow, disturbance in the emotional center, which is the heart center. The chanting of Ukara purifies the heart center, eliminates all distorting emotion, and reinstates the purest emotion of love and compassion, which is the king of the emotions, into your emotional center. So it removes the distortion, distorting emotions, and reinstates the pure emotion. Let us chant Ukara together. Ooh. Let us chant the third sound now, Makara. Makara is chanted as This happens in the head regions, at the top of the head. When you chant Makara, the entire body gets filled with energy and the mind becomes peaceful. The Makara operates in the idea center of your system, of your being. The idea that I am the body, mind, intellect, I am a limited individual gets corrected with the chanting of Makara. Just chant Makara.
Ita. Hello. ನಾವು ಮಂಗ್ಲ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ ಇನ್ನು ಹೊರಟಿಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು ಅರ್ಧ ಗಂಟೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಗುರುಗುಂಟೆಪಾಳ್ಯ ಬೇಡ ಇದು ಜಾಲಹಳ್ಳಿ ಕ್ರಾಸ್ ಇಂದ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು ಅನ್ಕೋತೀನಿ ಜಾಲಹಳ್ಳಿ ಕ್ರಾಸ್ ಇಂದ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು
Let us now chant Akara, Ukara, and Makara together. And once you complete chanting Makara, experience the deep silence. Let us start from the bottom and visualize as the energy, as you chant Akara, Ukara, Makara, the energy rising from the bottom to the top and beyond. You can chant along. experience the silence. Again, ooh and together. Sit silently, observing the peace and silence. त्वमेव माता पिता त्वमेव त्वमेव बन्धुश्च सखा त्वमेव त्वमेव विद्या द्रविणं त्वमेव त्वमेव सर्वं मम देव देव कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैव बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभाव करोमि यद्यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि। लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु। लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु। हरिः ओम। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम। Slowly open your eyes. I'll just share the prasadam here for people who have to leave. The people online, whoever can stay for 2-3 minutes to just discuss of what happened so far can stay. If anybody else needs to drop from online, they can drop. I'll just be back in a few minutes. Narayana, 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 So if you guys are getting late, you can leave, or it's fine. Okay. Okay. So what happened? What happened?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Omkaram. Are you able to feel the vibration? Akara, akara, akara. What happens after ma? Does the mind become silent? Vivek? Yes, no? No.
Yes.
So the Omkara, like I said, is all encompassing. So people online, Shanti ji, were you able to do the meditation?
Yes, I was able to follow it. Yeah.
Does the mind become silent after Akara, Ukara, Makara?
Yeah, of course. I feel the difference.
The Akara, Ukara, Makara, I said Omkara is all encompassing. All encompassing includes biology also. So the chanting of Akara, Ukara, Makara transforms the biology, the emotion, and the ideas and the beyond. So just the Omkara meditation. That's why Krishna also gives a lot of emphasis to Omkara meditation in the Bhagavad Gita. Just the chanting and meditation on Om, by chanting Om and sitting in silence. Nothing else. No other visualization, no other thought process. It's very simple. Chant and you will find the vibration here. That is physical. Physically, you feel it here. Physically, you feel it here. Physically, you feel here. And the moment you do one is there is a transformation in the brain. It's like a massage to the brain. Right? When your hand is hurt, when you do massage, it feel calm. So it's like a massage to the brain. The vibration sound is the brain gets time to relax. The brain is never, it's always continuously running. The brain relaxes and there is a silence. So this was sound. Om is sound. Then enters the silence part. The Om, you experience the silence aspect of the Om. So Om is both sound and silent. Existence is form, formless. And that form is called Shakti. Formless is called Shiva. Okay? Omkara brings realization of Shakti and Shiva. The more anybody who does Omkara meditation, just Omkara meditation, they go through various levels. Realization has various levels. I told Shiva and Shakti, right? You can have an experience that entire universe is Shakti. That is called realization of energy. Or you can realize Shiva, complete silence. And that's not just experience. That will remain in your daily experience. Even when you're interacting, maybe even when you're solving some complex task, your background will be that silence. You know? So usually for soldiers, right? People who are going to war, any army people, their clothes are very uncomfortable. Intentionally, they wear tight clothes, heavy clothes, because they're in usually outside in the scorching sun and very maybe in the forest and things like that. Their clothes are very uncomfortable. What happens? What is the mind of a person who's very wearing uncomfortable clothes? He's irritated. You're constantly, because you're wearing something so tight, you're very irritated. But for somebody who's very comfortable, you see doctors, they wear long coats, very relaxed. Imagine putting the clothes of a soldier to a doctor. He'll become agitated. Now, in that agitation, he can't do the surgery. So the clothes affect how your mind behaves. The Omkara, the Akara, Ukara, Makara, is like the gentle clothing for your entire biological system also. Okay, it relaxes the whole system. And the more one is the practice, the other is the understanding of Om because of the Mandukya Upanishad. Both together bring you the realization of Omkara. The objective is to realize Om, not to chant Om. Not to do japa of Om, 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 Om. That is japa. The Om has to become ajapa japa. It's called anahata dhvani. Ajapa japa. It means that you don't do japa. Japa is what you do. Ajapa japa is what happens in you. So for the enlightened being, there's a constant japa going on inside. It's called ajapa japa. He's not japa. Japa is you are doing it. There's a doership. In ajapa japa, there's no doership. It's happening. Spontaneous happening. And it's anahat. Meaning it's not audible. It is beyond sound. Okay? But it can become audible in deep state of silences. So what you hear as sound right now, what sounds you know of, are very superficial sounds. Okay? The moment your mind becomes silent, you start hearing the sound of the universe. You start hearing various music, divine music, formulas. So many of Nobel laureates in physics, mathematics, even the great mathematician called Ramanujan used to see the formula in his sleep. So I was just watching recently the round table of Nobel laureates. There's a video on YouTube called Round. So with all the Nobel laureates of that particular year, they have a round table. So one of the Nobel laureates said, I don't know how I get it. I know the problem when I'm in my waking state. Then I go into my sleep, I get the solution in my sleep. It is not from a conscious mind. So what sounds you hear are now very superficial sounds. The more your mind becomes silent, you start hearing universal sounds. That's why many people get music that's beyond human intelligence. Formulas, ideas that are beyond human intelligence. And that is what even all Upanishad is supposed to be. It is called Shruti. The Rishi didn't create it. He heard it. It was heard. And then they gave the mantra. The mantra is heard. You understand? And the mantra is like a formula. E is equal to mc square is a formula. And the formula has an application. But the formula was derived. There's an understanding behind the formula. Not any random person can understand the formula. But any random person can by heart E is equal to mc square. But they can't by heart what it means. That they have to study. That they have to realize. So the rishis, like how the scientists gave the formula, the rishis gave the mantra. It's like a formula. And also they gave the form to go with the mantra. The form that you see of God is actually a pointer to some reality. That is why Narayana has a form. He has 4 hands. And one of the hands is holding Shankha. What is the sound from Shankha? Omkar. Om. Right? Now it's saying that Narayana has 4 hands. God doesn't have 4 hands. God has 4 aspects. Shankha represents Omkara, which is everything. Creation, sustenance, destruction. Then he has Sudarshana. The Sudarshana means, Darshana means to see. Sudarshana means to see the auspicious. So the Narayana brings the wisdom in the form of Guru to see the consciousness. Otherwise you're seeing objects. That is Sudarshana, teaching. Then he has in the bottom hand Gada. Gada represents the karma. Gada is order. The entire universe is running on order. Okay? The order is gravitation force is an order. The sun, the earth has to go around the sun. It's an order. You can't say, no, I don't like the sun. I'll go around Mars. It can't change the order. There's a universal order that is called Dharma. That is in the hand of Vishnu. Then he has Padma. Padma is lotus. Lotus represents enlightenment. Lotus is born in mud and it has no quality of the mud. It doesn't look anything like the mud. It is beautiful and it grows out of the mud. So it is to say that all of us are born in duality and we need to become non-dual, blossom to non-duality with the help of the sun. Sunlight is a wisdom. So the Shankha, Chakra, Gada, Padma is a 4 operations of supreme consciousness. Operation of creating, sustaining, destroying, which is Shankha. Operation of Sudarshana, he has a responsibility to bring the wisdom. Operation of karma, law of karma. If somebody does something, it has to come back to them. And fundamental principles, the physics, the laws of science, they're all part of karma. And finally, mukti. He brings mukti. These are the 4 roles that the supreme consciousness plays. How do you explain this to somebody? You create a form of some beautiful being with 4 hands and with 4 objects. That is what the rishis did. So now an Omkara, Mandukya Upanishad is only about Shankha and Padma. By understanding Shankha, you blossom. You become free. You realize you are Parabrahma. When you chant Ma and there's silence, in that silence you are not the body, mind, intellect. What are you in that silence? Do you exist in that silence? You don't exist. What was there in that silence? Shantiji, what is there in the silence?
The silence itself is the truth.
Huh?
The silence itself is the truth.
Ha.
That's what
There is nothing in the silence, but there is awareness that there is silence. That awareness is you. That awareness is Paramatma. That when you were silent, was there 3 different silences? There can be 3 different sounds or thousands of sounds. But how many silences are there? You become non-dual in silence. In sound, you become dual. But when you understand Omkara, even sound you see non-duality. How to see the non-duality in sound? Understand that every sound is Omkara only. You understand? Then the sound doesn't create a imprint in your consciousness. When it is Omkara. When it's not Omkara, when somebody says something harsh or beautiful, it sticks. When it's Omkara, how does it matter what they say? Nothing stays in your consciousness. Your heart, your mind is clean. Okay, so with that, thank you for extending for another so much time. This was the first session, introductory session. And hopefully in the next few sessions, we will go deeper into the Omkara. And the next few shlokas, to just give you a quick trailer, the next shloka talks about waking state. The shloka after that talks about dream state. The shloka after that talks about deep sleep state. And the 5th shloka talks about the state which is beyond, called Turiya, or which is happening through all these states. And the shlokas after that talk about the Phalashruti of understanding the teaching of Mandukya. And with this, it helps you realize you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not what you think you are, you're not what other people say you are. You are that Parabrahman. That is the only reality. Okay. So shall we close?
Hari Om Krishna.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.